Abstinence education is better for young people, according to lawmakers in the House. This is the CitizenLink report. I'm Stuart Shepard, along with Chad Hills, who tracks the abstinence education issue for us here at CitizenLink. Hi, Chad.
Hi, Stuart.
Help us understand what it is that the House is suggesting is the better way. What is abstinence education?
It's, in essence, sexual risk avoidance, which is preventing teens in the first place from behaviors and choices that have caused a lot of damage and cost our nation a lot over the years.
And in the classroom, though, in a practical sense, what do they teach? I mean, what do they say no? I mean, is that it, or do they have to fill a whole quarter, I figure, or semester?
Right. No, that is not all they say. In fact, when you're in an abstinence-centered approach or a sexual risk avoidance class, they're going to discuss everything that is age-appropriate for the teens or the children. But what they're going to do is make sure that the parents are the primary sex educators. It is the parents' responsibility to impart traditional family values, their religious values, their beliefs on sexuality. And with sexual risk avoidance, the school is upholding the very highest standard possible, and it's up to parents to explain any other alternatives their family may believe. But as far as the school goes, it's the highest sexual standard, which is remaining sexually abstinent until you're in a committed lifelong marriage.
So one of the topics, for example, would be to have a proper image of yourself and who you are and how you fit into the world?
Correct. Yeah. Sex is more than just a physical act. It involves your emotion. It involves your intellect. And should teens in high school be focusing on that? Yes, their hormones are running, but isn't it right for schools and parents to direct them toward finishing their education, toward their future goals and objectives, and reassuring them that when marriage does come, sex will still be there. It's nothing to rush into right now. It focus on your current future, your goals, and finishing your education.
And I'm assuming that risk avoidance means keeping yourself out of situations where it might be tough to make a decision.
That's correct, yeah. And this empowers youth and encourages parents and empowers parents to be involved in each other's lives. The youth and the parents interact together. One of the strongest components to youth avoiding high-risk behaviors, especially in the area of sexuality, is their parents' approval or disapproval. So we completely integrate parents with the kids, and we teach them, we educate them about the futures, the way an unplanned pregnancy can impact your future, the way an STD can impact your future or end your life. And just how premarital sex takes a toll on your emotional life, your intellect, your spiritual well-being. There are all sorts of components beyond just the physical.
So it's based on a sense of self-worth, on a sense of morality, which we often don't hear enough about out there in the public schools, and also just the idea of family, making sure that a young person is moving down the road correctly. It seems really common sense, and it's absolutely not what's being taught in public schools today, most public schools today.
Right, right. Yeah, and in fact, the emphasis in public schools today, and somewhat with our national policy, is handing out condoms. Just give the kids a condom and tell them to be safe. Well, to us, that's no different really than handing a kid a power tool and giving him some goggles and say, be safe. That's not a smart move. We've got to consider that right now, until a woman or a young lady is in her early 20s or a young man is in his mid to later 20s, their prefrontal cortex in their brain isn't thinking completely rationally. And so it's imperative that parents and schools are directive with the kids. They guide them and walk with them down a certain course. They don't just hand them the materials and say, go do whatever you want. That's counterintuitive, and it doesn't work at this stage with kids, especially with their brain development.
Let's talk a bit more about why the House says that this risk avoidance is the better strategy. What are the differences in outcomes when you take that particular approach?
Right. Well, you know, with comprehensive condom-based sex ed, they tend to teach the kids how to evade their parents, how to avoid them, and their sexual lives are more private. They don't encourage parents to be the primary sex educators. They say anything goes. Whatever you want to do, sexuality, it's your choice. You're the individual. You make that decision. With sexual risk avoidance, it includes parents, and it says, we're going to walk with you through this, and we're going to be sure that you have the most successful life and that you make it to a committed marriage, and that you can preserve your sexuality and obtain your future goals here. It's sexual risk avoidance is a more holistic approach. It addresses not only the physical aspects of sexuality, but the mental, the intellectual, the emotional side of things. There's so much more involved, and it's the healthiest context for sex. Waiting until marriage is where sexuality can be safe. It's the only safe harbor for sexuality. To proliferate the myth that sex can be safe outside of marriage, I think is an atrocity that our schools are committing with our children today.
Yeah, it would take a lot of work, but let's imagine a world in which we could win people over to this common sense idea, to this provably successful idea, something that leads to better outcomes for young people. If that was what was being taught in public schools all across the nation, if that was the primary message being put out there, how would the country be different?
You know, it would change in that we would be placing a clear and unquestionable priority on sexual risk avoidance. In safe sex ed, this is rarely mentioned. They assume that kids are going to be sexually active and then tend to promote that. We would also discontinue funding for any programs that would compromise the message of sexual risk avoidance if they were intentionally and willfully promoting teen sexual experimentation. Those programs would be defunded. It would empower parents and caregivers to be the primary sex educators in their kids' lives. Only they can impart the values and traditions that their family believes to their kids, not schools, not the government. We would establish benchmarks to capitalize on the current momentum. This may surprise a lot of people, but the majority of kids in high school have not had sex and are not having sex. And we would capitalize on this momentum and encourage more kids to follow that trend. And last of all, we would increase public awareness. People need to know there is no such thing as safe sex outside the context of lifelong committed marriage. That is the only context in which sex is safe. And there's also research showing that that's where the best sex is had as well. So another encouragement for teens and parents.
We want to put these reports, these tools in the hands of folks out there. If you look in the summary section underneath this video on CitizenLink.com, we've got a link both to the House Subcommittee report and also one from the National Abstinence Education Association. If you look through there, there's a two-part report that they've issued, which came to many of the same conclusions, not surprisingly, because it's what really works. Many of the same conclusions as what the House Subcommittee did. Chad, thank you for sharing with us today. I appreciate your insight.
Glad to be with you, Stuart.
And thank you for watching. We appreciate hearing from you. You may always write to us at mail@citizenlink.com. We read every message that comes in. We appreciate your comments, your criticisms, your questions. They're all very helpful to us here. And remember, stand tall and be heard.